Hello and welcome to this tutorial. So I'm going to be painting this eagle in watercolor pencils. I started by selecting my paper. So I'm using a cold press 25% cotton, and it's 140 pounds and 9 by 12 inch. So I like to tape down my paper with some watercolor specially made tape, and so this really keeps the paper from rising up or curling as you're painting. So that's why mine is taped right now to my table. Here I'm just going to be erasing some of the pencil marks that I made, just to make sure that I have the area clean so that it doesn't show once I start painting over it. I'm also going close to where the bird is, and what you'll see also is that I'll be also erasing some of the marks, some of the shadowing, some of the lines. I'll make them finer, but always while keeping the lines still visible of my drawing. I don't want to lose that. I just want to minimize the dark lines as much as possible. I'll be doing this throughout the process. I'll just be erasing areas before painting them. So now I'm thinking about working on the head of the eagle. And so basically, I don't like to print a reference photo. I keep it on my laptop. And if you have a laptop, you can look at your reference photo from there. It saves on printing and everything like that, so I really prefer that option. So right now I'm choosing the colors that are closest to my reference photos. And I like these three here. I feel like those are the closest, so I'm gonna stick with those. I'll use gray for the fur where there's white, because the gray gives some nice shade to the fur. When you're working with watercolor, you have to think of it as a layering process from the lightest colors to the darkest. So here I'm erasing again some of the lines of the pencil, because I'm going to go in now with the gray, and or the beige. So I'm going to start off with the beige here, and I'm going to highlight some of the always look at your reference photo. So I'm going to highlight some of the fur here with the color. It's like an umber, light umber shade that the eagle has there. I'm using the light umber, and I'm also using the gray for the fur. So really just look at your reference photo and try and make it as accurate as possible, and as close to the reference photo as possible, the lines and the shading. So don't press too hard on your pencil. You're just creating a very light layer. Again, you don't want it to be too dark, because you can still keep layering with watercolor. So for now, we're just going to use the pencils and color lightly some areas, just to give the impression of some shading happening in the fur. Here I'm using a bit of gray, and I'm just making the hair stand out, always looking at my reference photo. I'm going to go in with a bit of dark brown and color in some of the feathers. So here I noticed that the feathers of the eagle are kind of like a light umber at the bottom, but they're much darker along the feathers. So I'm gonna do the lightest part first, and in doing that, then that would complete the first layer here. So I'm still using the ochre color here for some of the feathers. You really just look close to your reference photo and you can add the colors that come closest. I'm going to use a little bit of yellow in the fur of the head and then go back to my ochre now a little bit. And again, very lightly just color in some of the areas because we're going to go in after that with a wet watercolor brush and make the watercolor pencils turn into paint. So I've noticed that the claws are yellow with orange and some brown, so I'm going to start with the lightest shade. I'm going to fill in a little bit of the yellow from the claws, and also the feathers here at the bottom. They're kind of yellow at the bottom and they're halfway up, they're brown. So I'm going to shade now the darkest area. And you're gonna see once we use the watercolor brush that with the water that it starts to really make a very beautiful effect. So for now, just lightly color the areas that resemble your reference photo. So here I'm shading also the branch of the dead tree. So the dead tree is gray with black and it has some like orange as well, light orange. So again, always following your reference photo, just put in the grays where you see them and just very lightly shade in some of the areas. So now let's try it out. I'm gonna be using this 3/0. That's the size of the brush, and it's a specifically watercolor painting brush. There's acrylic painting brush, there's oil painting brush, and there's watercolor, and they're made to flow and absorb the paint better. So really very important to purchase watercolor brushes. I'm using, mine is Raphael brand, but really any brand can do the trick. But if you do buy the things that are better quality. It does help a lot in making your project better. So I went in with the finer brush, but now I'm thinking of trying the thicker brush just to see the difference. So it's okay to experiment and see which brush does the effect that you want. So right now I'm using the number 2 Raphael brush, and it's shading in bigger areas, which is good. But the issue with watercolor is that I always cover too much of a big area too fast, and then I can't really go back and undo it. So I'm thinking now to maybe go back to the smaller brush, because then I can work only on small areas. Because I don't want to cover too much. The trick with watercolor is to keep a lot of the areas still as light as possible, because you're going to be layering and you don't want to rush the process. Otherwise, it starts to look like kind of an acrylic painting where you're just making it thick layers. And the beauty of watercolor to me is the transparency that it has. So that's why it's important to have these nice transparent layers, one on top of the other. So I filled in some of the feathers as well with the watercolor brush, but I've decided now to color in more. So I like to do it step by step like this, but you could also color your whole drawing at once and then and then paint over. But I like this process better. Like this, I just control each area, I take my time, and I learn from my mistakes, so I can put right now I'm trying to shade in the reflection of the claws on the tree. And yeah, I like taking my time and slowly adding layers instead of just coloring the whole drawing at once. You could do that as well if you want, but I find it's more of a beginner step to just control each area this way. Just color in first and then paint over. So I'm starting now to add a little bit more darker browns here on the side of the eagle, and I really like the contrast it's doing, but again I have to keep remembering to take my time and not make things too dark too fast, because we can keep that for the end when we pile on the darker areas, which make a really beautiful contrast. So for now, keep it light, and thin layers of different colors until you get the effect that you want. So I've also shaded in most of the bottom branch, and now I'm doing the top. And I'm switching between pencil and then the wet water brush. Again, make sure your water is very clean. Clean it as much as possible, and so that you're not pulling in some of the water, the color in the water that you're using. And always clean your brush also just by dabbing it on the side of the glass. So here I'm going in for the beak. I really like the orange color of the claws and of the beak. I really love the way that that stands out. And I'm gonna fill in a bigger area here with my number 2 brush of the orange and browns and yellows. And look how beautiful it is, the way everything just blends. I'm really enjoying this part of it. I hope you are too. And then what I'm going to be doing now is just soon I'm going to just let everything dry for another 30 minutes. So let it dry and then we'll come back to it.